Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're very excited to have you here today. Today, we're going to be learning all about proactive time management and solving tomorrow's issues today. We're very excited to have Jay Pugh here. He's an excellent instructor. If you guys have any questions or anything, there is a chat box down below, and I'm going to turn the time over to Jay Pugh.
Thanks, Emmeline, and welcome everybody to Proactive Time Management, our kickoff for the new year, 2023, new goals, new you, right? That's kind of where we're going to. And I think one of the big things I always like to share as we kick off this new year is really understanding how do we not only solve today's issues today, how can we solve tomorrow's issues for today? Because that really is where proactive time management sits, is not just the putting out of the fires, but the creative ability to build better solutions for tomorrow. And once we do that, where do we spend that additional time? So for those, I always like to introduce myself a little bit about me. I am our vice president for the Center for Leadership and Development for New Horizons. I do have a PhD in instructional management and leadership from Robert Morris University outside of Pittsburgh, PA. And that's where I'm coming to you from as we speak. And I've been in this space for almost about 8 years in the leadership space. And I've been in the teaching and training space for well over a decade and a half now at this point. I'm a published author in the space of engagement. And the other thing is that I always like to share that I am a hashtag girl dad. I have 2 biological daughters and 2 adoptive daughters, all different ranges, 20, 11, 6, and 4, and they're all over the place. And that's why I have the gray hairs as we go. But no, I love them in every single way. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into today's webinar. So I want you all to think about this for a minute. What do you think the biggest roadblocks of managing remotely, or if you're in a hybrid environment, what do you think the biggest roadblocks exist in managing remotely? I want you to answer in the chat if you can. Attention, interruptions, miscommunication. It's hard to connect and measure. Yes, I like that things can have distractions. We have a measurement of productivity coming into play. Collaboration is always sort of a challenge. Yeah, sometimes time zones come into play, right? Time zones are a factor. So these are all great points. And the fact is that with remote environments, and I always like to bring this because we're going to talk about different areas from 3 of our courses we offer when it comes to proactive time management. Number 1 is a prioritization of your time to be effective. Number 2 is your ability to understand the remote roadblocks that come into play. And number 3 is how do you facilitate more meaningful dialogue? Because as Tony said, collaboration. As Kathy said, it's hard to connect sometimes. And so these 3 pieces come from our series of prioritizing your time effectively, managing remote virtual teams, and critical facilitation skills for leaders. So let's start with the key insight of where we're going to start with first. And number 1 is that when we manage remote and virtual teams, I'm going to give you all a little bit of an understanding. If something went wrong previously and you were in the office, you heard it. So you could be able to hop in, you could be able to dive into the trenches with them. You knew that it was an issue. The challenging with managing remote and virtual teams is that it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So what happens with that is it actually creates a very reactive mindset. It builds this reactive approach in the way that we move. Because if it's out of our sight, we don't know it's an issue until it becomes an issue. So with managing remote and virtual teams, we have to make sure that we're building a more proactive method. The ironic thing is that doesn't just apply to the remote workforce. It also applies directly to the current back to office workforce because we're all hitting the ground running. So we have to make sure that we're really planning to act a little bit more as leaders, that we are anticipating potential needs and concerns and what issues may arise. Our ability to shift from the reactive to the proactive is one of the greatest skills I think we're going to be facing over the next 3 to 5 years as leaders. So that is the big roadblock, is the out of sight, out of mind mentality. So because of that, let's ask this question. How are you currently planning your days or your projects or managing others? And boy, we're managing 68 things at once. I guess the real question I'm trying to ask is, do you run your day or does your day run you? I love these answers. Depends on the day, a little bit of both. Yeah. It certainly can feel like a combination. I would agree with that. Plan sometimes blows up days. It always depends. And I think you are all absolutely right about this, that we can't always control the, and Veronica, before I dive into that, I like what Veronica says. Do you know what? Sometimes my days run me over. And that's okay too. And I think it's really important. And it's when we're putting out fires, how many of you, do you know what? I'm going to shift gears on this because I like to make these very interactive. Yeah, there we go, Tony. How do you balance planning your day and practice good servant leadership? How many of you all sometimes feel like you are the firefighters in your organizations? If you can, in the reactions, throw a thumbs up if that's kind of how you're feeling a lot of days. If you go down to reactions, there's thumbs up. Wow. Wow. Okay, quite a few. Quite a few. Or sometimes, Derek, yes, it can feel like we're just drowning. Sometimes it can feel that way. I would agree. And so when this happens, how do we fix the system? Let's talk about that. So I want to go to Tony's question of how do you balance the planning of your day with still practicing good servant leadership for others? So the first thing that I'm going to teach you, that's probably one of the most important things you will learn in this webinar, is that it is very admirable to be the firefighter. And there are times that, yes, you have to jump into the fires and jump into the trenches and solve them and get them done. The biggest mistake that many leaders make, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just we're not aware of it, is the moment one fire's out, we have this tendency to want to jump to the next fire. And one of the biggest challenges I'm going to present, there's 40 people here. And one of the biggest challenges I'm going to present to you 40 is before you jump to that next fire, I want you to ask these 3 questions. We need to learn to be Smokey the Bear. As the great Smokey the Bear once so eloquently stated back in the 80s into the 90s, all the way to today, only you can prevent forest fires. So as leaders, proactive management doesn't just mean a solving of an issue. It means you're looking to build a process, build a system, build a component that does one of 3 things. Number 1, it either eliminates the fire from happening again. So I asked myself that question. When a fire happens, first question that once that fire is put out is, whoa, what can I do to eliminate the fire from happening again? Now, the challenge is only about 5% of the time you'll find something. 1 out of every 20 problems can probably be eliminated. So I will share some personal examples, and I'm sure I might even have some account executives on our call. And I will tell you that they are certainly firefighters, and sometimes I have to be firefighters with them. So one thing that we've ran into with an elimination of fire is that, what do you think the likelihood that every single one of our account executives knows all 27 of our leadership and development courses inside and out like the back of their hands, when they also need to know our IT courses and everything else. What do you think the likelihood is? That's a fair, and it's fair, right, Tony? It's fair. But I can't continuously hop into the fire every time, can I? So what do? I am finding ways to eliminate the fires from happening again. And one of the fires that we've eliminated was by providing a playbook. And that playbook allows them to understand what pains our client face in the leadership and development space. So one fire we focused on are the big 4 tenets on what sets our program apart. And if you ask many of our AEs, many of our account executives, what the big 4 is, they will be able to tell you what it is. That are 4 things in our program we provide. We have world-class facilitators. We have individualized action plans and takeaways. We engage the group and connect to the individual. And we also set up opportunities for post-class learning and coaching afterward. They know it. And that is the fire that is now completely eliminated. They understand what sets us apart from our IT training. But once again, out of all the fires that are occurring, it's 5%. So I know that that can't be the case. So if that's the case, then I better dive to the next 2. And what this is 2A and 2B. I don't look at these as 2 and 3. I look at these as 2A and 2B, or not to be. Sorry, that's my bad Shakespeare joke for the hour. So for 2A, what happens is that if I can't eliminate that fire, what can I do to reduce or control the size of the fire so that it's not so big next time? What can I do to reduce or control the size? So in this case, if I still run into a component with our leadership and development program that they don't know all 27 of our courses, what I did was I built a cheat sheet with audiences. Why would somebody want to take one course instead of another? Why would somebody focus attention towards this course instead of that course? Who would be the particular profile or audience that they would want to focus on this piece? Now, does that eliminate a fire? No. But instead of having maybe 100 questions a day, it has reduced the amount of fires and amount of questions I get. So reduce the size of the fire. Now, if we can't reduce the size of the fire, and I'll go to the IT world for this one. How many of you work in IT? Excellent. Excellent. Can you ever stop a server from going down? Nope. But I guarantee you have processes in place to get the server up faster. You've built in protocols and procedures that extinguish the fire faster. In my case, I would get emails saying, hey, do we have a course that does this? And can we do this in this amount of time? Can we customize or personalize or do this or do that? And I'm going, we're not extinguishing fires faster. We're just going back and forth in emails now. So we're not doing this faster anymore. So what we did was we set up the 20-minute SME call. We don't need to spend an hour on our discussion. You set up a time with me for 30 minutes and we could walk you through whether or not something is feasible and what would be the best plan of action to help you and your team. That's how we extinguish fires faster. So my question is, now that we've asked this, are you all Smokey the Bear? Or are we truly just the firefighter? You have to be both as leaders. It's a pretty heavy question, isn't it? So proactive management, your big challenge number 1 is that the moment you put out a fire, I'm going to need you to be vanilla ice for a minute because I'm going to need you to stop, collaborate, and listen. And Derek, it's a good point that sometimes budgets don't allow you to be Smokey the Bear, but I will tell you that if you are solving repeatable fires over and over again, it is actually wasting more time and budget putting out the same fire than spending the 30 minutes to an hour to build a process that could eliminate that for tomorrow. It's actually taking up more time in the forefront of it. So yes, you can't always be Smokey the Bear, and sometimes a fire is few and far between. But where I would start with the same fire. What fire is consistently repeated? Yep. And Derek, that's where we're running a webinar on collaborating through meaningful influence to get buy-in in a little bit of a different way. Yes. In the space of government, sometimes it's a little bit more challenging. Yep. I would agree. So how do we get buy-in? And whenever change moves a little bit slower, what can we do to increase our own processes to make it better? So that's why with Smokey the Bear, they don't have to be these prolific big wins. It could be a checklist for your team to make life easier. It could be making sure that, you know what, we have a 15-minute touch base just to hash out any sort of key issues that we're running into that we didn't have a chance to talk about remotely. It could be something small that creates large impact. That's Smokey the Bear. Smokey the Bear isn't spending hours upon hours in trying to create new systems, but it is focusing our attention proactively towards the systems that are broken the most within our control that we could alleviate. Now, I want to go to a question to where Tony mentions, how do you balance planning your day and still practice being good servant leaders? I will share one of my deepest, darkest secrets. And in my role as vice president, I will tell you that I have 9 facilitators. I have about 45 account executives. I collaborate with our marketing team, our operations team, our finance team, and there are not enough hours in the day. So I can feel that. So how can we still be a servant leader? I'm going to teach you a few extra tricks. Number one's a philosophy. And how many of you feel like, do you know what? Being available is the number one priority for my team. Perfect. Perfect. Great answer, Steve. Yeah, sometimes. How many of you at the same, right? And that's why we have the role. At the same time, how many of you feel like your shoulders are just way too heavy and you've taken on too much? So it's no longer the win-win, folks, is it? So philosophy number one, and I will share this with you, and I mean this with every fiber of my being. There's something I've learned, that the more people that need you, you don't always have to be available. But when you are available, be 100% visible. I will say that again. You don't always have to be available. But when you are available, be 100% visible. I might only have a 10-minute window to meet with somebody, and that's all I have. But in that 10 minutes, nobody else exists. Just like right now, I'm not answering anybody's email. A fire could be going out right now, right? But at this time and this moment, the only thing that matters are the 42 people in the room with me. You. That's it. And it is, Tony, that's exactly right. It is the right here, right now. It is that understanding that I'm not available, but when I am available, you have my undivided attention, my undivided investment, and my undivided confidence that I am going to get through what I need to with you. Being a servant leader is noble and it's valuable. Being a transformational leader, where you don't always have the time, but you can still transform new ideas, is the best of the best. And that's what your upper leaders find ways to do. So think of it in that construct. Now, another thing that I do is, and I will tell you, this is a hard system to break. So I'm going to tell you that you're going to have to break expectations and shift the dynamic. How many of you use do not disturb? Good. And I like that we're saying during meetings is part of it. Yep. During meetings. Only in the evenings, very rarely. And that's the thing, is that it's okay. And I'm not, yep. And focus time, Carrie. I love, and I'm not sure if it's Kari or Carrie, but I love that. Is that we can allow ourselves some focus time, and they can't be hour-long or 3-hour-long stretches, but we can chunk our time for things that truly need to matter to the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish. You're absolutely right. So whenever I focus on do not disturb time, I have, and I mean this, I use my shared calendar. In Outlook, I have a shared calendar. And not only do I have a shared calendar, it is the expectation and the reinforcement that if somebody says, hey, are you free? Don't respond, because then we're enabling back to the initial process. And we want to help, but we are doing somewhat of a little bit more of disservice by saying my shared calendar is up to date. And now the expectation for anybody that needs me, they don't have to ask me if I'm free. They don't. They go to my shared calendar and I will get a meeting appointment for 15 or 20 minutes, right? And it's 15-minute spots. People will use Calendly for it. They will use other systems to where that will block off their time. And if my time is open and you put time on my calendar, nobody else exists but you. And you have to be diligent about it, because the moment you say, hey, do you have a couple of minutes? And then you go, yeah. Then all of a sudden what happens is we breed the expectation again, going to that point of saying, I'm always here. I'm always available. And we're not. The last mindset that has to shift is that what if you were your own employee? If you are your own employee, how are you feeling as your own employee? Are you feeling tired? You're feeling exhausted? Are you taking care of you? Are you spending the time being a servant to you as much as your team? It's a pretty fair question. How many of you, maybe the employee that is not being treated as fairly as the other one is you? How many of you would agree with that by a thumbs up or a raising of a hand? Yeah. So focus time is important. Now, how we put in focus time is as follows. There is a tactic that is used called chunk, block, and tackle, CBT. And what that means is that you might, and I know, and I bet you any money that if I say, how many of you have a free hour in your day? That probably many of you are going to be like, absolutely not. Okay. How many of you have a free 15-minute segment in your day? Yeah, now we're getting somewhere. And even some may say, you know what, Dr. J, maybe I don't have 15. Do you have 10? Do you 15 5-minute segments to just hammer out the 5 minutes you need to? This is where chunk, block, and tackle come into play. So what I typically do as a chunk, block, and tackle is I take my biggest rocks, my biggest pain points, my biggest challenges. I take the biggest things that I need to have my focus time on to be successful. And what I do is I try to see how many 15-minute tasks I need to build out in advance. And I might be wrong, and that's okay. Maybe I thought I needed 20 and I needed 25. That's okay. But at least set the precipice. And then once you do this, what happens is that you put the times on the calendar. You put the times on the calendar. And it could be, hey, 4 15-minute segments. You know what? From 10 to 10:15 tomorrow, I'm going to pick 4 spots on my calendar between tomorrow and Wednesday, or tomorrow and Monday, or between these 2 dates, I'm going to put 2 15-minute blocks each. And that time is going to be uninterrupted. I don't exist to the world. So you put those pebbles, you break those rocks into pebbles, and then you put those pebbles on the calendar and you block those out. And what you also do is you may just give yourself a little self agenda. Hey, these 2 things are the 2 things I need to accomplish in this 15-minute window. I need to do A and B in this time. Then when that time comes, you do not negotiate. You tackle, you act violently on it. And you take those 15 minutes. There is no interruptions, no breaks, no going on to, hey, this is my social media or this is that, or no, hey, interruption time. You do not exist to the world. 15 minutes, uninterrupted, and you go at it. And I guarantee you that if you give yourself that extra hour a week, you will find more productivity and time in building out those systems and being that Smokey the Bear and finding those new ways. How many of you could create a pretty productive checklist for other people, for your team members, in about 15 or 30 minutes? How many of you have chunked and blocked the calendar time to do so? Perfect. That's what we're looking for, folks. That's the challenge. That's proactive management, is not waiting for the problem to come to you and then reacting to it. It's being ahead of it with your calendar and blocking off small, manageable, digestible chunks to tackle more proactively on the things that need to be done. Those pieces are part of our proactive or prioritizing your time effectively course. And Barb, perfect. Now, this is a great point that Barb brings up, is 30 minutes. Perfect. Is it, the question of the day, Barb, is it uninterrupted for 30 minutes? Because this is a great question and a great point. Perfect. Then don't change a thing. For some, what'll happen is they'll block a 30-minute segment and then they'll get interrupted. And then they're like, oh, I didn't even get the most out of my 30 minutes. Then make it 15. And if 15 is too much, make it 10. That's perfect. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. So when we do this, how do you decide on what you do yourself and what you pass to others? How do you decide? How many of you are like, wait, yeah, right, Tony? This is a heavy hitter here, right? How do you decide? What do I take? How many of you are like, whoa, I'm taking way too much? I love that, Barb. Love that, Jeff. Yep. If somebody else is highly qualified in that space or strategically strong, perfect. Who has the skill set? Sometimes it's who's free, which sometimes is the case too. Sometimes we have to look at the plates that are balanced. Yeah, I love that, Stephanie. Yep. Consider the areas. Here's the way that I try to look at this. Yeah, Tony, stretching too. That's called stretching. There's some things to where maybe they don't, and this is once again, proactive time management means you have to force yourself to proactively think about what the stretch is. And Thomas, yeah, if it's a teaching moment, if it's a stretch moment, then that's where we give it. So the Eisenhower matrix is something that has tested time and has still been very effective to this day. And I'm going to tie this to David Allen's GTD theory, which is getting things done. So what happens is the urgent important matrix, or the Eisenhower matrix, is as follows. If it is urgent and if it is important, and let's say not, and I know that some people will think, well, everything's important. No, it's not. We can be realistic and probably say not everything. There's a reason why priorities exist, because some things are more important than others. But the things that are most important and most urgent, that is what you keep and do. You keep, you do. So the vision of our program, the introduction of new course material, gaining more awareness for our overarching program, that's most urgent and most important. That's why you're seeing me today. Hi, everybody. It's most urgent and most important. So I do it. You do. Now, how many of you, after you focus on that, you go to what's really urgent, but maybe it's not so important? Maybe it's not it's urgent, it's a fire, it needs to happen, but it isn't necessarily so important to the bigger construct. And then what happens because of it is that the things that were important, that really aren't urgent, fall through the cracks. And then they immediately cycle back up to here. Now it's a urgent. Now it's a fire. Now it's right. So what happens here is with important but not urgent, that's why I'm saying you use CBT. You go to chunk, block, and tackle, and you defer it to a designated spot on your calendar. Because once again, out of sight, out of mind. If it's not in front of us, we don't tackle it. So you have to defer it to your calendar. You have to create the space for it on your calendar to deliver. The challenge is that we know something's important, but then what we tell ourselves is that's not due until next week. It'll be okay. Or that's not due until July. And then what happens is July sneaks up and we're 20% of the way through and we go, oh my goodness, it's already July. Because we didn't defer it. We didn't defer it to our calendar. That's how the things fall through the cracks. And that's when we defer it to our calendar, they don't. If it is urgent, but it is not necessarily important, this is where you strategically delegate how many of you said you're already doing, which is brilliant. This is what we delegate. This is where we look at the strengths of our individuals and see who is best fit to tackle which urgent issue. And if it doesn't quite get handled to the full capacity that it did, it's not the end of the world. It's a teachable moment. It's a lesson learned, as Thomas said. That's what gets delegated. And sometimes if it's just not urgent and it's just not important, maybe we delete it out of our mind for the time being. So that's whenever I consider with delegation, the way that I look at delegation is I pay close attention to these factors. What is most important to the organization? That's the you and the I in the organization. If that is the most important and most urgent in the grand scheme of things, I am doing it. I need to take this. This is where accountability comes into play. That's what you keep. The thing with management that becomes challenges is that you're no longer caught in the day-to-day operations. You are truly thinking about things from a bigger picture construct. And that's one of the hardest transitions from evolving from a top level employee to a manager, is that we were so good in the day-to-day and tackling the things that what happens is, as we move up to the bigger picture, we almost lose focus. And Tony, I am an inbox zero. Yeah, I am an inbox zero person. And I will tell you, for anybody that knows me that's on this call, I probably get a good 80 to 150 emails a day, pretty standard. But right now, I haven't looked at my inbox just yet because I'm delivering this webinar. And I will tell you that, but I will let you know that normally by the end of my day, I probably have anywhere between 8 to 20 emails that still remain in my inbox because those are tasks that need to be done that then become items that go on my calendar to be deferred. So yeah, I probably have about 14,000 emails, Tony, in my overall, but I only have about 8 to 20 in my inbox. And I do try to follow inbox zero. The second thing is I have to pay attention to what am I uniquely able to do better than anybody else? Now, this is the tricky part because the question that goes with this is, does anybody else have that potential capability to deliver it? For instance, I love teaching about influence, and I know that that is a space. Influence is a space where I know I thrive. I know that's a space I'm most comfortable with. It's a space I thrive better than anybody else. At the same time, is that most important to the organization? Well, not entirely. And is there somebody that could do it as well or almost as well as I could? Then the answer is yes. Then that's where I go, you know what? I need to delegate. This is where I need to delegate this and pass this off. And the hardest part is deep down, the biggest challenge psychologically is we have to pull an Elsa from Frozen because we got to let it go. So when I pay close attention to this, the third thing I pay attention to is plates. If I notice that there's somebody's plate that's a little lighter than somebody else's, I do pay attention to see, hey, is this something that where somebody could step up into this capacity to where they could take on this role? Because at the end of the day, you do want to make sure that things are balanced. I always get the question of what happens whenever there just isn't enough time in the day. I think that's just the one thing that comes into play. And how do I still have time to grow my employees? How do I still have time to make sure that they're getting the attention that they deserve? How do we do that, right? And I think whenever I look at this, I try to look at leadership on where people are on 3 different levels. And all your employees might be on different spaces, different focus points. And the way that I look at the levels of leadership are as follows. Number one is there are people that might be newer, they might be struggling, they might be having a tough time, but those are people right now to where you have to be the overseer. And you have to be a little bit more task focused with them. This is where real manager approaches come into play. I don't want to say command and control, but you are really overseeing the process and the way things get done. You're making sure things get done. You're making sure things meet deadlines, and you're making sure things meet within budget. What percentage of your employees do you think are really there? That maybe, do you know what? Maybe I need to give a little bit more time to them, or maybe I need to give a little bit more trust. We can't stay in level 1 with our employees, folks, because yes, things will continue to get done, but what do you think the likelihood your people grow are? What do you think the likelihood they're growing is? I love that you said 0, Nancy, because that's probably pretty close. So the way that we elevate our game as managers is we have to spend time as the coach and communicator. And they're not, Tony, they're not, because they don't feel like they're being challenged, and they don't feel like they themselves as people are being invested in. And what starts to happen is that when people move from level 1 to level 2, what happens is we can't just serve as an overseer or just be a manager. We actually have to be a coach and communicator. This is where we start to delegate and focus on their strengths. This is when we really start to communicate with them and actually seek their input. This is where you ask them what they think they could be able to thrive at. This is where the conversations and coaching comes into play. So this requires more time in the approach. And if you say, I don't have enough time, then what happens is everybody stays at level 1. So this is one thing that I do. Once again, you don't always have to be 100% available, but I will tell you, and I know one AE that's on this call, and her name is Sonia, and Sonia works very, very closely with me. And I will tell you that I don't have a lot of time, but I know that I make time for her to help her grow in the capacity she's going with. You have to. It's critical. Otherwise, you have plants without sunlight. The tricky thing is that what happens here is that sometimes what happens is we're elevating as a team is that we stay in the constant coach and communication state. And then what you start to find is that your employees are like, I got this. Why can't you just trust me? Why can't you just trust me to get this done? I don't need to have a dialogue about this. I don't need to get into this. I need you to trust me. Well, this is where level 3 leadership comes into play, because now when we talk about trust, this is where level 3 leadership means you trust them inherently to take care of what they need to. And you yourself are focusing solely on the big picture. You're no longer in the day-to-day. You're no longer in that. That no longer exists. You're no longer caught in the operational day that happens anymore. And what really happens is you fully trust. And now you're spending time anticipating their needs, knowing what it is that they're going to be looking for the next thing. And when you get to that level of trust with your team, folks, you can facilitate any dialogue, any meeting, and know that when you leave there, it's going to get done. So the way that this matrix works for folks is as follows. As you move from level 1 to level 2 as a leader, apologies. As you move from level 1 to level 2 as a leader, what happens is that your time involved with them has to increase. You have to spend more time with your people. And when you spend time with them, you're not just checking up on their work. You're checking in with them to see how they're doing. There's a huge difference between checking up and checking in. So your time involved with them increases. And it's no longer of just, I decide that this needs to be done, or even, hey, you can make a suggestion and I can decide. But it really becomes a space of, you know what? We discussed this. We actually talk this out. I actually get your input. I actually learn who you are as a person in the way that you move. So what happens here is that you actually move from level 1 to level 2 in more time mentoring them as people. And I'm not saying that you're setting up 45-minute and hour-long coaching sessions, because businesses make a lot of mistakes with that. Right, Tony? It is correct. It's amazing how this works. And I've spent a long time in this, and I've researched experts. This model right here is Michael Wilkinson. So I'll type this in the chat. Michael Wilkinson came up with this model. And whenever I really tried to understand his model a little bit more, I tried to really look into seeing, well, wait, how do we get there? And this is where I spent time in this myself and really learned what the ins and outs of working with this are. So this is where we came into this. And I said, you know what? We need to spend more time mentoring. That doesn't mean that we're spending 45-minute segments with them in this. And that's a mistake many businesses make. It means that it could be the 5 to 10 minute touch base to say, hey, I noticed with this is a teachable moment. Let's walk through this together. Or do you know what? Maybe they need to vent with you about something frustrating and you're a soundboard. And Tony, that is daring. That is daring to lead. That's Brene Brown. Don't be afraid to ask for the feedback, because believe it or not, you know what? In the younger generation of employees, Gen Z and younger millennials, do you know what the number one thing they want to see out of their leader is? It isn't expertise. It isn't what they know. It's that their leader is human and is vulnerable. That they are actually transparent about who they are as a leader, that they're human. They're human. So you have to allow yourself more time to be human with them. And then what starts to happen is they gain what is called, in this space right here, they gain self-efficacy. They gain self-efficacy. They start to learn, you know what? I actually can do this. And I can really create ideas on my own. And I can actually build something better. And I can actually do something a little bit more easy. And what happens here is that, whoa, now that happens, that coaching and mentoring doesn't happen as often. So actually, you spend less time with them and you give them more trust in facilitation. You may ask them a couple of questions and then you let them run. Your discussions may look like, have you considered? And just throwing it out there to them. And then at the end of the day, what happens is the strongest employees that exist, ironically, are the ones that don't need you at all. And that actually creates a fear in us as leaders. If my team fully sustained without me, would I be useful? And the answer is absolutely, you still will be, because you have a truly high functioning team. So when you move from level 2 to level 3, you actually have to back off the gas pedal and you have to create more trust. How many of you like this model? Pretty cool stuff. So with that said, folks, I'm going to open up the floor to some Q&A. I'm going to take the last sort of 7 minutes that we have here, and I'm going to allow some Q&A and see what questions we have. And thank you for the feedback, Tony and Barb, that, yeah, it is something that it really is this sort of approach of, you know what, there are ways that we can shift our approaches, and you're not going to do it overnight. One final thing before I get to questions, and as you have questions, please type them in the chat. Change is incremental. You will not see massive change overnight. Change is like the elephant. It happens one bite at a time. So find one bite you can take. Maybe that means I start setting up 10-minute segments with my team to check in. Maybe that means that I start blocking off 15-minute segments on my own calendar for me to focus, to not take it off my shoulders. Maybe it means it's those 3 questions for Smokey the Bear just sit right in front of us so that I don't forget. It's incremental. Now, I will open up the floor to questions. Yeah, and many of us, and that's the beauty of this, is that there might not be many, because I know some of you were asking as it was going along. There were some really great questions going. So if not, that's no problem. So then, folks, here's what I'll tell you. I want to thank you for joining me for this session. I really appreciate you taking an hour with me. And Barb, that's so helpful to know. It's stuff like that, what Barb just said, to where when we see where our people are on the scale, That's kind of where we get ourselves to say, you know what, this is the next change I want to make. Now, here's the thing. You only had a snippet of 3 different courses that we offer. So you had a little piece of prioritizing your time effectively, you had a little piece of managing remote and virtual teams, and you had a little piece of critical facilitation skills for leaders. If you are interested in the larger scale where we really do deeper workshops, the deeper fit where we really get to know you inside and out and really help you to grow, reach out to your account executive. They're there to help. That's what they're there for. Other than that, folks, I truly want to thank you for an awesome hour. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your week.